The views, assumptions, and opinions expressed by the Geo Godfather hosts, guests, and callers on the program are strictly their own and do not necessarily represent the opinions or beliefs of Electrocast Media.
The fact that we have such strategic predictability from the United States and tactical predictability, I think works against us and in the favor of Iran and its proxies. They know how we're going to respond. They know what we're going to do. But with Donald Trump, there's a lot less of that. Now, he may not always work against them as much as some might wish, but I don't think they saw Donald Trump as predictable.
Welcome to the latest episode of the Geo Godfather Wars. This is going to be the first of two special episodes dealing with the Iranian threat, what was an increasing Iranian threat, and what culminated in the elimination of the threat. And for the first episode, we have a number of really exciting guests that will be participating. We have Dr. Michael Rubin, who's a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute and who's also at the Middle East Forum. We have Norman Rule, who is a senior advisor for Transnational Threats Project at the Center for Strategic and International Studies and a former National Intelligence Manager for Iran. And we're lucky to have as well Seema Shine, who's the head of the Iran program at the Institute for National Security Studies and who headed the Research and Evaluation Division at the Mossad. One of the things that we are going to be talking about is it's really necessary to look at things in retrospect. Why did Iran pose such a threat? In order to understand the current landscape of the Middle East, it's important to understand what it was beforehand and what has changed. So the Iranian regime, its survivability was anchored in its revolutionary nature. It had surrounded Israel in multiple fronts in its strategy of establishing a ring of fire. So that included Hamas in the south, Hezbollah in the north, the Assad regime that was also an Iranian proxy, the Houthis from Yemen, its militias in Iraq. It was really a multi-pronged landscape that Iran had carefully shaped over decades. And while Israel had a very limited strategy of reacting to threats emanating on its borders, it was very, very reactive, and it was not shaping the landscape in the same way that Iran had. And beyond Iran's ring of fire, it also had a strategy of uniting the theaters or uniting the arenas by serving as a source of instability in foreign theaters. So it was not only a regional threat. This had led Iran to supply Shahed 136 drones to Russia to use in the Ukraine and also to export drones to Venezuela. So in turn, these states were also giving Iran their fighter aircrafts, their weaponry that it would use in the Middle East. Moreover, Iran saw its attempt to achieve the nuclear status as critical for its survivability, and it also sought to hide behind its proxies when they were having Hamas, Hezbollah, or the Houthis that were firing on Israel or on US servicemen across the region. It was giving Iran strategic depth. They were hiding behind their proxies. And in this episode, we want to uncover what led to the erosion of this strategy of deterrence. The West had, for a long period of time, attempted to deter Iran, and this had increasingly eroded. And in turn, its erosion was accompanied by Iran establishing new norms of terrorism. In turn, you have to think, how did the US, Israel, and the Gulf Strait strategy evolve towards Iran? So let's get on with this episode, attempting to unpack what was the nature of the Iranian threat. Before I pass it on to the panelists, I just thought I would begin with the fact that not only was the unprecedented nature of the Iranian strikes was really an extension of the fact that Iran is inching towards the nuclear status. And as a result of that, it perceives the nuclear status as critical for the regime's survival. Similarly, it's become more emboldened and ambitious in its strategy to wreak havoc and serve as a disruptor across the region. And its strategy of unification of the arenas aims to increase its defensive lines at increasing distance away from its borders and expanding the territory from which it can encircle and attack Israel from multiple fronts, whether it be from Syria and Lebanon in the north, the West Bank and Jordan, Gaza from the south, Iraq and Yemen. And while it is doing that, the proxies from Yemen, the Houthi proxies, are destabilizing shipping lanes and averting the attention of the international community towards various local crises, such as in Gaza, as opposed to the real issue, which is Iran being on the brink of becoming a nuclear state. So one thing naturally feeds into the other. Its regional strategy of seeking to encircle Israel is an extension of Iran inching towards the nuclear status. And ultimately, deterrence has increasingly eroded and it really lies in tatters. And as it lies in tatters, I think not only do we need to consider what are Israel's options, feasible options that it would consider for the future, but we also do need to consider why deterrence eroded, what led to this point, and what are the evolving strategies, whether it be of the US, whether it be of the Gulf, or whether it be of Israel. Each one of these entities are going to be evolving their strategies towards Iran and the evolving nature of the Iranian threat. So to kick this off, I would perhaps start with Seema Shine, if that's possible.
Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me. Yeah, I'll start with your last question. What happened? Why Iran decided to do what it decided, and why deterrence doesn't work anymore? And this is the nature of deterrence. It works as long as it works. And the minute somebody changes it, we understand there is no more deterrence, and it's only the only possible way to evaluate it is looking in retrospect. So let me say what I think brought Iran to the decision, which is a very unprecedented decision to attack Israel, not only to attack from the Iranian territory on Israel, but also with this amount of different types of flying things, more than 300. I want from the beginning to put aside some speculation that I see on international media, as if it was only a small attack. It was designed not to kill people. So everything of that is not correct. Iran couldn't know how effective will be the interception. Iran launched more than 300 drones, ballistic missiles, and cruise missiles in order to hit two big bases and in order to kill people and to make a lot of damage. But the fact that it didn't work doesn't play into the favor of Iran. It is in favor of others. Probably will mention it later. So the first reason why I think Iran came to this decision, and one has to remember that it's not only unprecedented, it's also against the common evaluation of most of researchers and I think also intelligence communities dealing with the Iran and with the leader in the last 3 decades, looking on the Iranian leader Khamenei as someone who is cautious and is calculating his steps in a way that balance others. So what happened now? The Iranians are saying it's because of the event in Damascus, because of what they say is a part of the embassy of Iran. Israel doesn't accept it. Israel says it's a place where the IRGC officers were gathering, but it's not the embassy. But that's not important from Iranian point of view. It's the embassy or the consulate. And I think in this specific event, also the high-ranking general that was assassinated there, who is not only that he is a high-ranking, he was the head of the IRGC Air Force. He's part of the elder guard of the IRGC people, very connected. Some will say that he is only second to Soleimani. I don't know if it's correct, but he's an important person. The second element, and of course it is accumulating, I call it open bill that Iran has vis-a-vis Israel for many years, especially in Syria, attacks that were happened in Syria and elsewhere as well as in Iran. What is perceived to be done by Israel that didn't take any responsibility for that. The second reason, I think, is what Iran perceived to be the weakness of Israel in the eyes of Iran. It started before the 7th of October, but it is they probably were encouraged by the fact that half a year we are involved in a war. It's not finished yet. But in the fact that Israel is in a situation where population is deported people from the south and from the west, all the situation that everybody knows about Israel, the fact that we see so many demonstrations on the international arena against Israel with the context of the Palestinian situation and the internal debate in Israel, in the Israeli society. All this together probably has encouraged the Iranians that Israel is weaker than it was a year ago or 5 years ago. The third point is what they perceive to be difficulties in the relations between Israel and the US. One has to say the only deterrent enemy of Iran is the US. If there is anyone who can deter Iran, it's the US. They always perceive that Israel cannot harm them in such a way as the US, and therefore Israel was always, they believed to be less concerned with Israel. And what they saw in the last several months was that there are frictions between Israel and the US. What they don't understand is, of course, that frictions can be, but close security relations can be at the same time. But that was the understanding. And of course, I would add to that also the fact that after the attack in Damascus, the US immediately came out and said it's not us. And then they say that we are not going to be involved in any war. I understand it differently, but the Iranians understood that actually the US is saying we are aside, it's you and the Israelis. And the fourth point is the internal political situation in Iran. I think this is a development that many people did not pay too much attention. We have been, I'm not sure that we have also understood how to translate it, but we understood for the last 4 years since the selection, I would call it, of Raisi as the president, and then many others nominees that we saw that the leader was doing, and the last elections to parliament, to the Majlis. We saw that what is happening in Iran is that it's a very monolithic political system. There are no different voices. Most of the voices are conservative, radical voices. And I think, and the IRGC has a very important say in these circles. And I think that this became to be because there are no other ideas. There are no ideas, not that that people like Rouhani and Zarif were moderate, not at all, but they had different way of looking on developments and different way of handling issues to get to the same conclusion, but differently. And today we don't have it in Iran. And I think the leader that is becoming older and older is surrounded by people, extreme people, and I think their influence was very, very important. And I think that the same way as, and I will conclude here the reasons, I think that the same miscalculation that we in Israel had as to the capability of Iran or the will of Iran to conduct such an attack, I think the same miscalculation is now in Tehran. They believe Israel will not retaliate. I don't think they are right and correct. And I think this is the best recipe for miscalculation of both sides, deteriorating the situation. So this is as to the reasons why I think Iran has gone on this very unprecedented step. I think I exhausted my time, but if you want,
before you do exhaust your time, may I just quickly ask you, how do you see Israel's strategy towards Iran having evolved? As Iran's strategy has evolved, it's become much more muscular, much more belligerent, much more ambitious. How do you see Israel's strategy having evolved?
So it's a compliment to say that it's a strategy, but it's a policy. I think what Israel has found Iranian fingerprint everywhere around our borders. If it's in Lebanon, in Syria, in Iraq, in the West Bank in the last years, and in Gaza. And from our point of view, Iran was doing everything it could in order to jeopardize our security and our regional situation. So from Israel's point of view, it's a bilateral struggle. It's not shooting from Iran to Israel territory, but it is between Iran and Israel. On the Israeli side, the decision was to try and two things, to delay as much as possible the nuclear program. I think we should at the end talk about that because this is the big issue. On the Iranian program, it was to delay. Israel, for the time being, didn't do anything in order to prevent or to stop this program, but only to delay. And in the other aspect, the regional aspect, Israel was trying to fight Iran wherever it could. If it's in Gaza, if it's in Lebanon, less and less, but more and more in Syria, because Syria became a focal point from the Iranian point of view of transition of arms on one hand to Hezbollah, and on the other hand, in order to establish a kind of a military base for Iran and for the militias that Iran brought to Syria in Syria itself. And therefore, we will find Israel trying to what we call the campaign between the wars Israel was conducting in the last years. We succeeded partially, as always in this kind of policies. But if Israel would not do it, we would see Iran well established militarily in Syria with a lot of forces, a lot of arms, and as Israel has said, we will not allow Syria to become Lebanon. And that was the background for Israel's policy in Syria. I just will finish by saying that the people that were assassinating the last time in Damascus, the head of the group, the Mahdavi, he was the one who conducted and who organized the whole war against Israel in the last half a year. He was talking to the Houthis, to Hezbollah, to the Iraqi militias, and he was not only supporting them with arms that were transferred, but also with policies and with recommendations. And also the 3 Americans that were killed in Jordan 2 months ago were part of what he organized in the region in order to put pressure on the US. So these people are not innocent people that Israel decided to attack them in an Iranian consulate in Damascus.
Sorry, Sima, just before we move on to the next speaker, you're saying that Israel's strategy was focused on targeting Iran wherever its fingerprints were, whether it be in Syria or anywhere else. Did it evolve from there into something else, or has it just remained at that plane?
What do you mean if it remains? If it will remain?
Has Israel's strategy evolved from there onto something different? You're saying Israel was targeting Iran wherever it found it, disrupting security. Did it evolve from there into something else, or does it still remain at that point?
I think it still remains at that point, okay, because we don't go just after Iranians wherever, and of course not in the international arena and etc. We are concentrating on what is happening on our borders that affect immediately our security.
Okay, thank you so much, Sima. I appreciate this. Norman, would you like to speak next?
Life is hard, but finding a really great podcast makes the days go by so much easier. Hi, my name is Blue Telusma. I'm a writer, an emotional intelligence coach, and the host of Humanize with Blue Telusma, a podcast where we believe that when you humanize everyone in the room, a great conversation is almost guaranteed. Join us every week here on Electricast as me and my guest co-hosts unpack big topics and interview even bigger personalities with a sense of humor and a dash of mischief. If you're looking for a new best friend in your head, we've got you covered. Electricast.
Good afternoon. Thank you for including me with such extraordinary individuals as legendary Seema Shine and Michael Rubin. It's a real pleasure to see you, Barack, and to see them. I think maybe I'll take this in a slightly different direction so that I don't overlap on any of Seema's superb comments with which I'm in full agreement. And I think I'm going to touch briefly on how might Tehran be looking at the moment, and what does the last 6 months in October tell us about broader strategy in the region and in the world. So first, I think if I were in Tehran, I'm going to be worried about an Israeli strike. But absent that strike, I think Iran believes its leadership probably feels it's achieved the following goals at no cost. They've satisfied hardline desire for action against Israel for the many attacks that have taken place against IRGC personnel and equities in Syria, as so eloquently described Seema. So they, in essence, have said to their own people, look, we've done something to try and deter Israel from further attacks. They've punished Israel directly from Iranian territory without igniting a conventional war, particularly a war involving the United States, which would mean regime overthrow. They've demonstrated that they could conduct such a strike without producing any significant new international pressure or isolation. And indeed, the attacks allowed Iran to engage multiple world leaders who reached out to Tehran before and after to sort of talk about containment. So in some ways, Iran's international exposure has been maintained. They achieved very little damage against Israel, given Israel's superb military air defenses aided by the United States, Britain, France, and other partners. But they were able to launch something from Iranian territory and strike Israeli territory. Maybe it's just a hole in the runway at Navatim. I saw a press report, don't know if it's true or not, that there was a minor damage to a C-130. But whatever they've done, they have touched Israeli territory directly. The president of the United States said don't. They did. Not only did they do it, but they launched an unprecedented attack against Israel involving what some have described as the world's largest single drone attack. They tested their technology against U.S. and Israeli technology and tactics. And the lessons may be bruising. Many of their missiles proved to have lousy technology. Not a surprise. Iran's industries aren't known for their efficiency and shaker-like qualities. But nonetheless, they have acquired some lessons which they can incorporate in their own world or pass to proxies. They've also achieved this without having any pressure or any reason right now to change their existing proxy activities. That is all not insignificant for Iran. But let's pull out a little bit farther, and I'll try to get through this quickly. What does this conflict tell us about how we ourselves have worked through the years and how that led maybe through to October 13th? We have a situation in the world where we now have islands of power projection by revisionist actors. Now, it's easy to see this in the Pacific, where a small group of rocks, somebody puts an air defense object on it, and we say, who wants to start to launch a Pacific war over that small rock? And suddenly the rocks are expanded, and there are many of them, and it's a large body of water, and China is now exerting itself in the Western Philippines, telling Vietnam, Philippines, and others what belongs to China, what not. That could turn into a control of international sea lanes. In the Middle East, Iran has created islands of power projection in Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, that not only have conducted multiple attacks against Israel, often in the same week. And I think this is overlooked, that Israel endures proxy attacks with an unprecedented array of weapons, from Katyusha rockets to ballistic missiles and drones, from 4 separate countries in the Middle East, often at the same time. That is extraordinary. Iran's proxies also in the Middle East through Yemen are touching the global economy. So you've had shortages of tea at Sainsbury. You've had shipping costs go up between Shanghai and Los Angeles. You've had aid be delayed to Sudan and Egypt losing its cost, et cetera. It's a long list. And Iran has been able to achieve this through these islands of power projection. And last, of course, you have Russia in Africa to the Wagner Group, and now it's Africa Corps, embedding itself in a series of autocratic military-led governments in geographies rich in natural resources, rare earths, to include uranium, and some indication that even Iran is talking to these people about uranium. My second point is we have watched the death of deterrence. If you put a list together and you said, okay, I want to know what Iran might do that would provoke Western military action against Iran or Israeli military action against Iran. How about taking hostages? How about seizing ships? How about damaging the world economy, touching the world economy? How about firing missiles against US military vessels? How about firing missiles and drones, hundreds against Saudi Arabia and Yemen? How about having the production of 60% enriched uranium normalized? 60% enriched uranium has no civilian use. Have I just said Iran has a military nuclear program at present? Stiffing the IAEA, conducting limited metallurgy with its nuclear program, and enabling Hamas to conduct this horrific October 7th attack. Just another horrific attack, such as the Houthis attacked Saudi Arabia and elsewhere with missiles, just different tools and different flares. And finally, October 13th. I have to say that if tomorrow Iran conducted a cold test of its nuclear program, do we believe with this record of non-response to every other red line that the international community would respond with military action? Can you name an action Iran might conduct that would indeed cross a real red line? I should also mention they allowed al-Qaeda to host a base in their country for many years, and the current leader of al-Qaeda is in their country. We also have Iran now touching with its proxies the globe. It's not just the Red Sea issue, which again, touching the economy of the world. It's not just pulling in various actors that deal politically on this issue, but it's doing this with a frequency and a pace that, frankly, it's almost a monthly issue of some sort from Iran throughout this event. But there are also some good points from this, some reasons for hope. The United States has proven itself to be the indispensable nation. The United States brought a number of things, maybe self-restraining its capacity, but only the United States put 2 aircraft carrier task forces in the region. Only the United States was capable of pulling together, whatever you think about it, the ad hoc coalitions in the Red Sea, the ad hoc coalition around Israel, pulling in world leaders, perhaps to constrain Israel, perhaps to constrain Iran, but that's Washington pulling levers with its various partners saying, let's do this. And I think that touches the last point, which is China and Russia are irrelevant to this conflict. For many years, we've had China replacing the United States in the Middle East, and that's preposterous. China is absolutely the dominant geoeconomic and commercial actor in the Gulf. It has been since 2014. That's a natural, organic progression. They sell things and buy things we don't in the West. The Saudis, the Emiratis, others sell and buy those things, and that's that. But China has not played any significant role or even sought to play a role in managing this. And of course, Russia remains a malign, albeit vindictive actor, which must be treated accordingly, but it's been able to conduct no pressure on this event as well. I will pause there. Thank you.
Before, just one final thing, how do you see Gulf strategy evolving towards an Iran that keeps creating new norms and, as you said, leading to the death of deterrence?
I think it's maybe the way to ask that question is how they see the U.S. leadership and Western leadership not responding to Iran's actions. And that has caused them to do a couple of things. First, they certainly do not seek rapprochement with Iran, but they do seek détente. And that's a reality, and that's not unwise. Next, they're not going to engage in robust opposition to Iran unless they know they have some significant cover. I think we'll see that dynamic play out in how the Saudis and the Americans continue to evolve the negotiations for the ongoing strategic agreement discussions. I think you're also seeing Iran having sent a message to the Gulf states. See what we did to Israel? Maybe it took a while to get to Israel. How long will it take for us to get to Dubai? How long will it take for us to get to Dhahran? Maybe you want to think about what you do with the West. And I think that's going to compel them to look for a different type of American presence. I could imagine the Gulf states saying to the United States, look, just having a small presence of aircraft in our country from which you launch attacks on proxies in Iran, that's not good enough. Because if you're not going to be with us the next day, you launch those aircraft, proxies attack us the next day, and what? We're going to wait for 22 days as we did after Abu Dhabi and Dubai was struck? No, 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 no. We need some other kind of security relationship that allows us to be sure that even having an American or Western presence in Manama, or et cetera, is not going to invite a catastrophic response against which the West is not prepared to stand with them. Over.
Thank you. Michael, I'd like you to please speak from your perspective on the US's evolving strategy, how you see the future of deterrence, if there is any anymore, and just your take on Israel's potential response.
Well, first of all, Barak, you're very, very generous to suggest even that the United States has a coherent strategy at this point. That said, I do want to say how much I learned from listening to Seema. I always learn from listening to Norman. And I will address your question directly. First of all, the Americans live in a cloud of self-delusion, of wishful thinking. Look, we can look at the fact that the overwhelming number of drones and missiles were down before they approached their target. But if 7 ballistic missiles got through, what if those missiles were tipped with nuclear warheads, chemical warheads, or biological warheads? We may be patting ourselves on the back in Washington, where I'm sitting right now, and suggesting this shows that we have real deterrence. But I'm not sure whether the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and those circling the supreme leader are taking the same lessons home. The other issue I think we constantly get wrong is we want to rationalize that even if Iran developed a nuclear weapon, that they are not suicidal. But that's based on a straw man question and a straw man assumption. The problem from the United States perspective, or especially from the Israeli perspective, is never whether the Iranian regime is suicidal. The question is, what happens if they are terminally ill? And after all, when we talk about Iran and its nuclear program, or even the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and its nuclear program, we're being woefully imprecise. If Iran develops nuclear weapons, it's not only going to be the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, but the most elite units within, the most ideologically pure units within the Revolutionary Guard that have command, control, and custody of those weapons. Now let's look at recent Iranian history. I was there during the 1999 student uprising, after having previously been there under Rafsanjani. Then you had the 2001 soccer unrest, when Iran lost 3-1 in a World Cup qualifier, and diaspora television convinced Iranians, and perception means more than reality, that the team threw the match in order to prevent men and women from dancing in the streets. You had the 2009 post-election unrest. More recently, we've had environmental protests. We have had economic protests. We've had the Women Life Freedom protests. The fact of the matter is, Iran is a zombie regime, but it's the guys with the guns that matter. However, with increasing frequency, there are sparks, and then the question becomes, what happens if some of the security forces or join in? And we have a situation like in 1989 Romania, where you see the noose slowly tightening. You know that there is going to be someone in front of the firing squad within 24 hours. What's to stop those units, the ideologically pure units of the Revolutionary Guard, from launching as they want to try to fulfill their ideological prerogative? You know, too often in America, we project. We look at multiculturalism as walking into a sushi restaurant and ordering a mojito. Fundamentally, however, we need to recognize that different peoples think in different ways. And it's possible to go in the Islamic Revolutionary Guard bubble when you're 8 years old, because they run the equivalent of evil Boy Scouts programs. And then you can go in through Revolutionary Guard run universities. The point of this is some people are true believers, even though I'll be the first to admit that the Revolutionary Guard isn't homogenous. And I say this, I think, as the only American who's both met Ismail Qaani and Ibrahim Raisi. Now, so we have that problem. If you have inevitable regime change from the Iranian, from the base, what's to stop a nuclear Iran from actually launching? Deterrence is simply out the window at that point. I also think, and this isn't taken into account in Washington nearly enough, we have to consider the psychology of Ali Khamenei. Tomorrow is his 85th birthday. He's had cancer at least once, Many people believe twice. He's partially paralyzed from a 1981 assassination attempt. And whatever you think of the Iranian regime, I think it's safe to say, from the progressives to the ultra-conservatives in the West, we can all agree that cancer-stricken octogenarian supreme leaders, ayatollahs, tend not to have a long life. He has dedicated his whole career to the eradication of the state of Israel. He may want, on a psychological level, to see it fulfilled before his time on this earth is up. And remember, and I hear this all the time from Iranian regime officials, there's never been a Jewish state, a Jewish governance that has lasted for more than 75 years or so. It's a nonsense historical argument, but they truly believe it, and they believe that Israel is on its last legs. Again, we can't project our own mentality onto them, and that's where Seema's answer was front and center, absolutely A100 correct. Now, other issues. We have why now? We have wishful thinking about reform. How many reformists actually resigned in protest of the treatment of the Women Life Freedom Movement? We have wishful thinking about the Pasdaran not controlling the economy. But we all know they control about 40% of the economy. When I teach, if you want to understand the role of the Revolutionary Guard in the economy, take KBR, Bechtel, Halliburton, merge it with the Army Corps of Engineers, Northrop Grumman, Boeing, ExxonMobil, and Shell, and Walmart. There you have the Revolutionary Guard in the economy. And therefore, if we're giving money to the Iranians, it's actually pumping directly into the Revolutionary Guard's economy. We have wishful thinking about responsibility. Iranian command and control isn't like us. Iran is a dictatorship, but it's a dictatorship by omission rather than commission. You are allowed as an Iranian 05 or 06 to do anything which the supreme leader hasn't specifically forbidden. And that means when in the United States we want to assign responsibility, is there a smoking gun? We go back to the signals intelligence. You're never going to find a smoking gun because that's not the way Iranian command and control works. But we're too busy navel gazing to recognize that. Look, I want diplomacy just like the next guy. But as you know, I spent about a year at sea with the Navy after I left the Pentagon. I didn't serve in the Navy, but I was teaching on board the ships. And whenever I would ask admirals, what posture should the US Navy take if we want the Iranians to take our diplomacy, our deterrence seriously? To a man and a woman, they said, take our carriers out of the Persian Gulf. And that may seem counterintuitive, but the Persian Gulf is narrow. The Persian Gulf is shallow. Our ships are vulnerable to drones, to mines, to anti-ship missiles. But if we're parked 600 kilometers off in the northern Indian Ocean, we can strike at Iran. They cannot strike back at us with any accuracy. And that's when the Iranian leadership begins to take notice that we actually mean something when we say our diplomacy is the last best offer. The Americans, and I'm concluding here, oftentimes self-deter. And that doesn't bring peace. Projecting that sort of weakness only encourages people to push the envelope further, whether it's Putin, whether it's China, or whether it's the Revolutionary Guard. We can't confuse the perfect for the good. I mean, we might say, and too many American analysts define an Iran nuclear weapon as 20 kilograms of 90% highly enriched uranium. But I'm sorry, wasn't the bomb dropped in Hiroshima about 75% enriched? And do we need a perfect fissile bomb if we have a dirty bomb? What economic damage would that do? At any rate, let me just conclude by saying what great work the Henry Jackson Society has been doing. About 9 months ago, I was on a call to talk about the reports on the Pasdaran that Elizabeth Sampson had done, and they remain core reports for anyone who wants to work on these issues of the Revolutionary Guard and so forth. So I want to congratulate you guys, Barak, on your work and on your team. And let me throw the floor back to you.
Michael, thank you so much for that. It was really, really robust. Something that you said that really stuck out was about Khamenei being an 85-year-old octogenarian who's had cancer for many, many years. And it reminds me of the Godfather movie when Michael Corleone speaks about Hyman Roth has been dying from the same heart attack for the last 20 years. But when that happens, and somebody is zealous and they're fully committed to the eradication of Israel, they know they're getting older, they know they've beaten the odds until now, there's a great prospect for overreach. On one hand, Iran is testing boundaries of what they can get away with, and they're establishing new norms. But at the same time, overreaching could also be part of that calculus. It may not be a designed one, but it may be one as a result of just merely miscalculation and overreach.
Well, first of all, I agree with you. Look, despite what's trendy in academic discussions, war in the Middle East isn't caused by oil, and it's not caused by water. It's fundamentally caused by overconfidence. And arguably, the United States is as guilty of that as anyone else. The difference is we have a democracy, we have a free press, we have political accountability. That does not exist in the Islamic Republic of Iran. The Iranians are so afraid right now that Iranian diplomats to whom I speak say that no former official, let alone current official, can leave Iran without getting the permission now of the intelligence department of the Pasdaran, of the Revolutionary Guard, because they're so afraid that people might talk about where the money is hidden or get insights into decision-making or so forth. You're absolutely right. The other thing which is looming, of course, is the transition. And this is where I also think the West is wrong, because we tend to look at things in the here and now. When Sultan Qaboos in Oman died, for reasons which we don't need to discuss and the Washington Post constantly got wrong, he didn't have any children. And in the transition, Sultan Qaboos of Oman had to have, when he died, the Omanis needed to choose a successor within 48 hours. If they couldn't do so within 24, he would leave a letter behind. When I talk to folks, Iranians and people in the Gulf, and I spend most of my time in Iraq when I'm in the region, they point out that even though in theory there is a process in Iran, that there's no timeline associated with that process. And therefore, you might have a situation in which the Revolutionary Guard, for example, which I do believe is not simply an equivalent of Abdel Fattah al-Sisi's military dictatorship in Egypt, but is truly ideological at its top, that they might block anyone who doesn't mirror their own ideological predilections. At the same time, there's nothing that says that a new supreme leader has to be a single person. There was the debates, and David Menashri at Tel Aviv University used to go into this a great deal back in the 1980s, Ori Lubrani as well, and Ziema Divon, that you had a situation where you could have a council of leadership. And if you have a council of leadership, remember when Osama bin Laden was killed, he appointed Zawahiri, but then you had a spectacular series of attempted terrorist attacks as every, for lack of a better term, franchise leader in different geographical departments tried to show that they were the true leadership of the movement. So what would the dynamics be of that factional struggle should we have that in place in Tehran? Unfortunately, I think the United States and other countries in the West are calibrating our strategy towards Iran, towards the here and now, if not wishful thinking about the past, rather than recognizing just what might happen in the future.
No, I appreciate that. I would welcome, thank you so much, Michael. I would welcome the audience to actually chip in with questions. In the meantime, before questions come in, if we can consider options that Israel may be considering to counter the recent attacks. On one hand, I would take the position personally that as deterrence has failed, Israel can't afford to take the win, as President Biden said. And I think that would be highly provocative. But I would also think that if Israel decides to simply focus on countering an Iranian proxy, like having been given the green light by the US to enter Rafah, that actually this plays into Iran's strategy of the ring of fire or uniting the arenas, whereby it engulfs Israel, it enhances its own regime survivability, it enhances its own strategic depth, hides behind its proxies, and is not going to be held accountable. It's like, if I would use a crude metaphor, if somebody has a disease, you don't address the symptoms, you address the source. And I think that it would be a strategic error to just focus on the proxies as opposed to the source itself. But I'm going to open it up. Michael, as you just spoke last, if you want to speak first, and then we'll pass it on. What are the options at Israel's disposal? And hopefully questions in the meantime will or may come in.
Well, Barak, if I may, let me punt this question to Seema, because I would feel silly expounding on this and theorizing on this when I suspect that Seema might be much closer to the center of that debate.
Close your eyes, exhale, feel your body relax, and let go of whatever you're carrying today.
Well, I'm letting go of the worry that I wouldn't get my new contacts in time for this class. I got them delivered free from 1-800-CONTACTS. Oh my gosh, they're so fast.
And breathe.
Oh, sorry. I almost couldn't breathe when I saw the discount they gave me on my first order. Oh, sorry. Namaste.
Visit 1-800-CONTACTS.com today to save on your first order.
1-800-CONTACTS.
Okay, I just have to remind everyone, I'm not in any way in the government. I don't know what are the decisions made. There is one decision that was explicit publicly, that is that Israel will retaliate. How it will be, of course, there are diversity of options. Israel has the possibility to do, in a way, what Iran has done, to send a lot of rockets on different IRGC bases in Iran and on the open sky. I call it the open sky scenario. It has its pros and cons. I don't want to mention, but I think one of the first in the list on the side of the Israelis is to retaliate in the same way, proportionally, meaning perhaps the same numbers or same two sides or something like that, and to show, I'm sure once Israel will do it, it will be much more effective than what Iran has done. So this is one possibility. The other one is, I hope it will happen. It's not any response, but it is part of the ongoing struggle between Iran and Israel, and that is whenever we have information of arms delivered through Iraq to Syria, Abu Kamal checkpoint, we should hit it. If it's in international airport Damascus, or it is on the border with Iraq, we said, and this is a strategy. Iran will not be allowed to establish a military base on our border with Syria. And I just want to mention that to remind us that Bashar al-Assad didn't do anything in this half a year of war, because he understands better than any other player how fragile is his situation, and that he might find himself out of the game if he does something, and therefore he's not there. So I believe Israel will continue to do everything in Syria that it has done before. I assume Israel can do a major cyber attack. Israel can have a major clandestine activity in Iran. We have done it in the past, according to foreign reports, and I am sure it could be done also. Is it compared to the attack? I'm not sure we have to compare always, because at the end of the day, everybody knows we can do it. And if we decide to do something else, it might embarrass the regime much more. If tomorrow two IRGC bases are attacked somehow from inside, it is much more embarrassing than airplanes coming to Iran. I don't know if Israel can do it, but if it can do it, it will be very interesting. I think there should be also not an alternative, but it should be also a comprehensive international campaign against Iran, isolating Iran, not calling every second day the foreign minister, but closing the phone and saying, we don't want to hear you anymore. You know, what is for me a big question mark is how does the European foreign ministers and others talk to the Iranians when Iran is supporting Russia to continue this war in Ukraine? And if tomorrow Putin will decide to attack Poland, then Europe will be NATO will be in a war with Russia. So I don't understand why you are talking to the Iranians, and why people are the way to handle this situation is to isolate politically, economically, to take Iran out of all the international organizations. This is something that will make Iran understand they stay with Russia and China, and that's their role, not more than that, which Iran, I know, doesn't want. Even the current regime doesn't want, not to talk about other groups in the region. And of course, the last and not instead of, I think Israel should take the opportunity of the coalition that was created and was expressed in the last interception of the attack, and make the Middle East a different Middle East. There are prices Israel has to pay for that, but that is the ultimate failure of Sinwar on one hand and of Iran on the other hand. A new architecture in the Middle East with Israel integrated in the Middle East and normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia, and all of that under the umbrella of the US is something that is really frightening Iran. Thank you.
Thank you, Sima. Michael, do you want to go next? What options you think are at Israel? What's the likely potential?
Absolutely. First of all, I think Rafah is of the utmost importance. You don't put out 80% of a fire, you put out the fire. I think, honestly, one of the things that's holding us back from the United States standpoint is widespread recognition behind the scenes that there are a number of tunnels coming from Egypt that the Egyptians didn't declare, that this is going to lead to a serious crisis in the Camp David Accords, especially if Hamas weaponry, Iranian weaponry, went through those tunnels for reasons which the Egyptians have trouble explaining. Look, the Israeli Navy drives
By the
more...
way, sorry, by the way, what do you think the reason for that is?
Well, when talking about the Egyptians, it's natural to talk about incompetence. But perhaps for some reason, the Egyptians were trying to play it both ways. Maybe, what oftentimes happens in the region, people try to cut deals in order to buy themselves immunity from a direct threat, and only to realize that eventually they also will experience blowback. But look, the Israeli Navy drives more German submarines than the German Navy does. One of the problems with airstrikes, and I'm borrowing this from former retired Air Force General Chuck Wald, who led the initial U.S. air campaign on Afghanistan, is you can fly in with surprise. And remember, Iran is 4 times the size of Iraq, 6 times the size of Great Britain, but you can't drop your ordnance and then fly out with surprise. And so you have to go after enemy airfields, command and control, anti-aircraft batteries. The only silver lining, if you want to go after the nuclear program, is when it comes to these facilities which are buried under mountains, you don't need to destroy those facilities. You only need to destroy the entrances to them, which too often our commentariat forgets. That said, look, when the Israelis hit the building adjacent to the consulate and the embassy, and Seema is absolutely correct, it's not an embassy, it's not a consulate. Even though the Iranians would be the last country on earth, the last regime on earth to complain about the sanctity of diplomatic property. The fact of the matter is, Israel showed its great precision. They weren't just throwing stuff at a wall and seeing what sticks. The Iranians also need to be questioning how it was that the Israelis knew this in advance. What sort of penetration do the Israelis have inside the IRGC? The fact of the matter is the Iranians could be very surprised, and I would fully support hitting a Pasdaran base with great precision to show the Iranians what they can do, and at the same time to show the Iranian people that they clearly differentiate between the regime and the public. Look, if I were Israeli, and I'm not, I would even go after the guard towers of Evin prison with precision to drive home that point. But, bottom line up front, Rafah here, even though I agree that you go after the head of the octopus, you don't go after the tentacles, Rafah needs to be addressed.
Thank you, Michael. Norman, what are your thoughts?
I think Israel has a challenge with opportunities. It needs a sort of a Goldilocks response, a response that's sufficient to reset deterrence, to maintain Western air defense support, to continue to allow it to defend itself as effectively as it did on October 13th. It wants to avoid a conventional war, because a conventional war would fracture some of the relationships with the Gulf and would complicate an environment where it needs to focus on, as Michael correctly stated, Rafah first, and worry about how best it can return the 80,000 members of its population and the economy that they maintain to northern Israel. This is a consultative process. They're thinking it through. They don't appear to be rushing. That appears to be sober. Their capacities are numerous, and Seema alluded to a number of them, and Iran can't defend against the number of these capacities, and we'll have to worry about that. The United States and the Europeans will continue to push for restraint. They have their own logic, but it's just part of a long line of every red line can be broken. But the next one will hold to that one, et cetera, et cetera. And Iran, I don't think sees this. I do think that if you're in Israel, you do have to look at the nuclear program differently. If every other red line is passed and a country is making 60% enriched uranium, it has multiple underground facilities, and the potential to create covert or alternative facilities and more underground sites, which are mushroomed around the country. That does require thought and an approach, but these are hugely complicated, resource intensive, intelligence based operations. They can't be rushed. And I think this is a sober conversation that's happening. I have not thought there would be a day after response by Israel. I thought it would be at least a week or two before they could pull this together with everything from Passover intelligence, resources, logistics, et cetera, et cetera. I do think there's also taking this to a different level, and that is as the United States and Europeans and others call to press Israel for restraint, which I think is a bad word in this situation, I think Israel could derive some reduction in pressure regarding Rafah and other areas as they nonetheless pursue ultimately a response against Iran.
Thank you, Norm. I just want to ask a couple of questions from the audience. Jonathan Campbell James asks a diplomacy-based question, really geared for Sima. Has the Israeli leadership used the recent Iranian attack to rebuild a wider anti-Iranian coalition? Very little appears to be happening. No UN resolution, apart from Western leaders telling Israel to be restrained. So that's a second question by Christian Havas. Based on his first term, what would a potential Trump presidency mean for deterrence? Would he be able to establish it? Can you turn the clock back? If all these red lines have been passed, can you actually go back? I don't know if the dynamics of reality work in that way. So those are two questions. If Sima, you could answer your question and the Trump question to both Norman and Michael.
I think I have referred to that slightly before. It's correct. I do think that the international community should, as the US tried to do something. There are today probably new sanctions on Iran. There was a gathering of the G7, and and of course there was the coalition with the Brits and the French intercepting the Iranian attack. So there is a kind of organizing the Western Front against Iran, but I think it's not enough. As I said, I think there should be a complete political isolation. I think there is a legitimate demand of Israel to the Europeans to put the IRGC on the terror list as a terror organization. There is no question that they are a terror organization. The problem is that what we see in Europe, and I'm sorry I have to mention it, but the Iranians are stabbing a journalist in London, and then they are conducting, they didn't succeed, but they are trying to conduct a terror activity in Paris against the opposition group, and they are supporting Russia for a war in Europe. And I don't see any activity on the side of the Europeans. I ask myself, what else has to happen in Europe in order to say, I am trying to, since I am not so young as you know, I am trying to use my memory. And I remember what happened when there was a terror activity in Mykonos against the opposition people in Germany. All European countries brought their ambassadors back home, and there was of course it was a different period of time. But there was an activity, something happened. And now nothing happens. The Iranians are wide a cyber attack on Albania. Nothing happens. They are sending their agents through Europe for different. They are intercepted, fortunately. So in order to create some terror activity, nothing happens. So I don't know what Israel can do. We are talking so many years about the problem of Iran. I remember myself talking to so many government officials in Europe and other places, explaining how much Iran is putting emphasis on their regional proxies. Nothing happened.
Okay, thank you. On a personal note, when red lines are being crossed and you're seeing Iran on the brink of becoming a nuclear state and new norms being established, I personally don't think that the diplomatic route is really one to place emphasis on. But regarding a potential Trump administration, can a Trump administration reestablish deterrence? Opening it to you, Norman and Michael.
Norman, do you want to go first?
Sure, but I'd like to just append a comment to Seema's statements. We do know that multilateral diplomatic and economic isolation applied over time does shape Iranian decision making. They test that process to test our fortitude. This is a time consuming process, and it requires stiffness from Europe that is very difficult to obtain. The Biden administration shows very little interest in this process. And the fact that Iran exported a record amount of oil last month, 1.8 million barrels, that's the highest in 5 years, tells you pretty much everything you need to know about sanctions pressure. I don't think the sanctions pressure coming out as a result of this October 13th will be significant. And on the United Nations, frankly, I understand why people didn't try for a resolution at the UN Security Council. Russia and China would have vetoed it. They protected everything Iran has done in the region for almost 12 years. It still deserved to be pushed since Israel is so often and wrongly attacked over and over in the General Assembly and elsewhere. It should have been a process of our diplomacy. It might still be, I doubt it. On the Trump administration and the Obama-Biden administration have different perspectives in the region. There's no sense that Donald Trump wants to involve himself in a conventional war in the Middle East. There is no sense that Donald Trump wants to involve himself in a process that would fracture economic zones or introduce new pressures into the global economy. However, the Trump administration has proven itself to be something that, if tested, would respond if regional conditions merited and if partners wished. And the killing of Qasem Soleimani did have a deterrent effect on Iran. Iran did not significantly expand its nuclear program under the Trump administration. It's a simple fact, whether you agree or disagree about pulling out of JCPOA. It did not significantly expand its nuclear program until the Biden administration was elected. That's that. And I think you would see Iran at least have a sense that they can't predict what the Trump administration will do. And I'll close by saying that the fact that we have such strategic predictability from the United States and tactical predictability, I think works against us and in the favor of Iran and its proxies. They know how we're going to respond. They know what we're going to do. But with Donald Trump, there's a lot less of that. Now, he may not always work against them as much as some might wish, but I don't think they saw Donald Trump as predictable. I defer to Michael to amplify or disagree. Over.
Well, I actually agree with Norman. The issue of unpredictability is actually the key. Let's be frank, we could have a computer algorithm write Biden's response and his calls for more diplomacy and restraint. It takes little imagination to figure out how the Biden administration is going to react to statements that will come out of the White House, especially in the lead up to the election, given the pressures they face in some local communities and some swing states. The second term different, and I agree, Trump is unpredictable, although that can go both ways. So I agree with Norman there too. The one issue I just want to highlight is the difference between a first-term Trump administration and a potential second-term Trump administration is that the Trump team will much better understand how the levers of power work. There's going to be much less learning on the fly, and therefore, for better or worse, the second-term Trump team is likely going to be much more effective in doing whatever it wishes to do. And I say this as someone who doesn't have a foot in either of the camps. I'm not particularly enamored with either of the leading candidates. The only thing I want to add to Seema when she talks about Europe, and I absolutely agree with her, is I have it on very good authority that there was also an attempt to launch Iranian drones from northern Cyprus, which was shut down when the intelligence was made clear to the Iranians that they couldn't do this without accountability. The point of this is we have a no man's land. 160 kilometers off the coast of Israel, which Europe has allowed, and the United States for that matter, to persist for almost 50 years. 50 years come July. That is no longer a tenable situation. If you talk to school teachers from the so-called Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus, the sizes of their classes have grown to more than 40 kids per class, most of whom speak Arabic or Farsi instead of speaking Turkish or Greek. And that's because of the numbers of people coming in from Iran and Syria into this zone And again, when you have a vacuum, it's seldom the forces of altruism which are going to fix it. The Sixth Fleet area of operations is no longer someplace that the United States Navy simply sails through. It's becoming the center of gravity, and we've got to start acting like it.
Thank you. If I don't know what your time is like, is it possible to just ask you one final question from the audience before we wrap this up? All the speakers good with that? From John Wilkin, he asks, would an attack on a plant which manufactures Shahed drones be an option? Could it discourage the regime from continuing supplying them to the Houthis and Russia?
Actually, could I jump in on this?
Yes.
One of the one of my side jobs is I work as a Persian language analyst at the Foreign Military Studies Office at Fort Leavenworth, which is where for U.S. Training and Doctrine Command. And one of the things to understand about the Iranian drone program is, number one, they've been using drones since 1985. This isn't their usual substanceless announcement. They have the real capability, and we've seen that. But when it comes to drones, part of what they do is not only export the weapon itself, but they also export the ability to manufacture that weapon. So we have a drone factory, for example, in Tajikistan. I'm not sure whether the drones which Iran is selling to Ukraine come directly from Iran or they go through third countries. The same thing is true with Lebanon and Syria, and the same thing could just as easily be true with the Houthis. So should Israel go after drone factories? Absolutely. But it would be wrong to assume that that means that there's only a single drone factory and it is only located in Iran. And the reason why Iran does this strategy of exporting the capability to manufacture is because it fits within their general doctrine of plausible deniability, which we should no longer allow them to get away with.
To add to that plausible deniability is also now there's a nexus between that and its expansiveness, whether it be territorially, strategically, there's an expansiveness taking place there. So similarly, developing drone factories outside of Iran fits that same model of how it wants to expand its territory for its proxies as well. There's a consistency there. Norman, do you have any insights on this?
Iran's drone industry is federated, it's broad, it exists throughout the country as well as in locations outside of country. It is conceivable and would be proportionally appropriate for Israeli military officials to look at striking Revolutionary Guard facilities associated with drone and missile production, development, command and control, perhaps. But I think it's going to be difficult to isolate any single drone facility in Iran that would have a substantive impact on what Iran is doing with the Houthis. In addition, the Houthis maintain a domestic capacity trained and developed by Iran, perhaps even sustained by Iranian and Lebanese Hezbollah personnel who currently operate from within Yemen under the aegis of the Iranian embassy and their existing training program. I'm not sure that's an issue. However, in the long term, what is a significant issue is if peace breaks out in Gaza tomorrow between Israel and Iran tomorrow, it's nothing but peace. Iran will replenish Houthi stockpiles of missiles, drones, introduce likely some other weapons to offset advantages they saw from Western defenses, and provide training and guidance to enable them to once again touch the globe's economy the next time Iran feels that's necessary to do so.
Thank you. Seema, final word?
I think that what has proved to be effective on Iran is a real threat, a real military threat. That doesn't. The only way to prevent the military threat, military option in the future, would be if Iran understands there are limits for the U.S. and the Europeans, and as long as they understand that no one wants to be involved in any war, nothing will be. Even if Israel attacks one or two plants of UAV of drones, that's not the issue. Iran is spread all over Iran. It's underground in many cases. This is not the way. The way is to make the regime understand that the stability of regime could be under pressure or real pressure. As long as they believe that this is not the case, anything that will be done, they can overcome. As was mentioned before, it's a huge country. doesn't have huge resources, of course, in a very difficult economic situation, but 6 times more than Britain, well, quite big.
I mean, I have to, though, interject, Seema, and say that what you just said now is an evolution on Israel's part, because Israel never ever spoke about regime change or threatening the survivability of the regime. It was kind of about countering Iran's growing sphere of influence, the threats that Iran posed to Israel. But is it possible to say that Israel is going to consider strikes that would perhaps send a message, your regime's survivability is at threat?
No, I don't think I would separate from what you said. Israel did not talk about a regime change, because I don't think Israel or anyone from the outside can make a regime change. It's only the Iranian people. But Israel has been saying, not once and not twice, that only a threat to the stability of the regime, from the stability for the regime, not from the point of view of changing the regime, but if there is tomorrow an attack on the nuclear sites of Iran, this is a threat to the stability of the regime. And I think as long as the regime doesn't feel that there will be something like that, for anything that they are doing, they will continue doing what they are doing.
Well, I want to thank you, Seema. I want to thank Michael Rubin, Norman Rule, Seema Shine. It's been a really high-level conversation. It's actually been stellar. In order to consider what options are available for Israel, one needs to naturally understand the current reality and the history that led to the current reality. So I think that this session really shed light on that, and I would like to thank you all. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining me for this episode, and please join us for the next as we continue to explore how geopolitics impacts the world at large and you. The Geo Godfather Wars is an Electrocast production. If you like our podcast, please rate, review, and tell your friends and colleagues to listen in.
Electrocast.
Hi, this is Jennifer Urezzio. Are you ready to create more freedom in your life and your business? Join me and my amazing guest experts on Asked and Answered by Soul, where we discuss life, love, and business, and provide you with the answers to those really big questions. Who are you, really? Why are you here? And what does it all mean? Tune in wherever you listen to podcasts, and don't forget to share the magic with a friend.
Welcome to the Candle Power Hour. Come with us backstage behind the scenes of show business spanning over 4 decades and bringing you the experiences that can only be told by the people who were there.
Our guests are from the A-list, the F-list, and everyone in between. Get set for some of the most insane, hilarious, and inspiring stories you will ever hear.
I'm Mercury.
And I'm Diego.
Your hosts for the Candle Power Hour.
Electrocast.